would just like to thank you for this morning's talk. My mother died Friday.
Died on Friday.
I was just thought it was so appropriate, and the peace of mind that gave me with what you said this morning was fantastic. But that wasn't my question. The question I had was really related to, with all the talks you give, the retreats and advice, have you ever looked back and thought afterwards that, man, I wish I wouldn't have said that, or boy, I goofed up there, or this was a mistake?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, only the Pope is infallible. No, the teaching, if we can even call it the teaching, of course, is not mainly based on information, not primarily based on any kind of conveying of information or facts, but on its most fundamental level, the teaching is awareness, which is non-conceptual, so that can't be wrong. So on the most fundamental level, nothing could possibly be wrong because it transcends all concepts. That's the essence of the teaching. The moment you move into concepts, the possibility of error, of course, arises. But the first level of concepts that are used are concepts that point back to that which is beyond concepts and beyond thought. So the concepts that are used in the teachings are concepts that are, whose purpose is to point back to that which is beyond. So, and that also, there can't be much wrong about that, except that it could be that I used a pointer that perhaps was not the most appropriate one for a certain person or group of people. That could happen. But again, error doesn't really apply here. It might not be the best possible pointer. Maybe I wake up in the middle of the night and say, oh, I could have said that. That's maybe possible. But usually it doesn't arise. Next level up, occasionally I let information slip in to illustrate certain things. I might talk about something historical, or might talk about some fact about something I read in the paper or whatever, just as little illustrative stories. And of course that's where things occasionally get wrong. Even in The Power of Now, I wrote, for example, that 100 million people had been killed in the 20th century alone by other humans. And I later realized that the figure was much too low. Apparently it's quite a bit higher. It could be 140 million. Nobody knows exactly. It's dreadfully high. And so I got that wrong. And sometimes in talks, something may come in a historical fact or something, and later somebody tells me, you got that wrong. In one talk I talked about taking antidepressants, and I wasn't perhaps careful enough to emphasize that you should do this extremely slowly with the help of a conscious physician and so on. And there was one or two physicians in the audience who got upset and said, this is all wrong, it's all wrong. So that's usually what happens is that the answer to a question, or even the general talk, always there's a correspondence between the questioner and the answer. Or when there's a talk, there's a correspondence between the energy field in the room and what comes out. And that's not decision-based. There's nothing in my mind that says, oh, in this energy field I'll better talk about that, because I don't know before the words come out what's going to come out, so that doesn't apply. And so it can happen, though, that a person asks a question and an answer comes, and I later realized that the answer was not the deepest answer that I could have given, but I do know that the answer that comes out reflects the degree of openness in the questioner, usually. And so if the answer is not that deep, then the question wasn't that deep. That seems to be often the case. Occasionally, a deep answer comes even when the question is not deep, but perhaps there's an intuitive realization then that it is possible to break through the surface layer.
Not this question, though.
No, your question was deep enough. Thank you.
Well, I want to say this morning was perfect. You were right on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So there's an ancient saying, of course, which you may have heard, that says the teacher and the taught together produce the teaching. So it's a two-way process. It comes out of presence. It doesn't really come out of a person. It comes through the person who is empty enough, spacious enough, so that it can come through. It's not off the person. So on the surface level, then yes, mistakes are quite possible. On the most essential level, no. I knew a person many years ago. I only knew her for about a year, then she died. She was a psychotherapist, and she would sometimes come to see me. I was still doing private sessions then. She would often come to see me once a week or so to ask questions. And her questions were so wonderful. The deepest answers came with that person, always. And I said to her, maybe we should record, because your questions seem to be so, draw out these wonderful answers. And she agreed, and then a little later she was too ill and she died. And just before in the months before she died, she went through this shift where she didn't need to ask any more questions. She went through complete presence, shift, surrender to what is, and her body became virtually transparent and luminous, and she was just there. And then she didn't need to ask any more questions, so it was too late for recording anything. Just the shift happened, and the flowering happened, and that was enough.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's an amazing realization that who you essentially are is you're invisible. The moment you move to thoughts, nobody knows, scientists don't really know what a thought is. What is a thought? Where does it live in you? Where does it live in you? That's an interesting thing. Does it have now, mainstream science is still largely totally materialistic, which means it says that matter is all that exists and everything is matter. And it says that consciousness is a byproduct, or they say epiphenomenon, other words, a byproduct of the human brain in some way. This is one could talk about this for a long time. I don't want to go this way and entertain you in that direction. It is more important, experiential, I want this to be an experiential gathering rather than an intellectual gathering. But ask yourself the question,
what is a thought? Where does it live? All your memories. I suggest, for example, the memory of, please go ahead, the memory of your deceased grandmother, for example, or the memory of you when you were a child. When you were a child, you lived in a particular place, maybe you had your own room, and you can suddenly recollect many details of the room there that you had when you were a child, even how the doorknob felt when you opened the door, the carpet, the furniture, and you can remember your grandmother or your first teacher when you first started school, the teacher you had then, and you can remember. Okay, now you hadn't perhaps thought of that first grade teacher in several years, but now that I mention it, suddenly there he or she pops up. Where and in what form did this first teacher of yours, or your grandmother, or the memory of the room that you lived in when you were 6 years old, and of course there are hundreds of thousands of memories like that, but where did this live in you? In what form was it? If it's molecules and atoms in your brain that somehow certain atoms represent your grandmother, and other things represent other molecules, represent other things. The weird thing is, if a surgeon opens up your brain, he will not find any of your memories. He will not find you. That's a strange thing. He finds things, but not you. He cannot find, because you do not exist on a physical level ultimately, only as a physical body. But the depth of you as who you are, even who you are as a person, which is still limited, even that, just the human, you don't exist as in the physical realm, really. I don't know where you exist, perhaps in the cloud that and then you download the memory from the cloud. So every thought is invisible. But of course, it uses the brain in order to express itself. Emotion too. The emotion itself is not visible, but it can manifest, of course, with physical symptoms in the body. But in itself, it's an energy field, a non-physical energy field. So the entire structure of the psychic structure of you is essentially invisible. This is why in the famous little book, The Little Prince, I think it was, famous classic, it says, what is essential is invisible to the eye, this eye, which means that means all the other senses too. What is essential is not visible to the senses. So you are essentially invisible. You are not ultimate. And the way I see it, is thought does not even exist in this dimension. That's all. You are multidimensional. You exist as a thought-made entity, but it's no longer. It's associated with the physical realm, but it is not confined to the physical realm. Your thoughts are invisible. Your whole sense of who you are is invisible. Nobody could find it by looking for you in the physical realm. You're not there. And it's an amazing realization that who you essentially are is you are invisible. All the thoughts that go through your head, they are not visible to the senses. Interesting. So, and that's only the surface part of you, even there. Let's go back to the analogy of the ocean. You have the ocean. On the surface of the ocean, there are waves and ripples. Now, in this analogy, let's say every little ripple or wave believes itself to be an independent entity, disconnected from other ripples. It only knows itself as a ripple because it doesn't know its own depth. And every wave only knows itself as a wave. Wave could be perhaps VIPs. If you own a private jet, you're a wave. And if you don't, then you're a ripple. So, but the wave and the ripple are all short-lived. Their destiny is the same. The body, one day the body is here, you're somebody, the next day you're nobody. Whether you're a wave or a ripple, doesn't matter. So now this ripple, of course, feels uneasy on the surface of the ocean because its sense of identity is very limited, and it feels sometimes threatened by other ripples, or it wants to use other ripples to associate with in order to become a bigger ripple. And sometimes temporarily that works, but not for very long. And then you're looking for yourself on the horizontal realm. Where can I be a more complete ripple? Can you help me be a more complete ripple? No. Or I need you, if we come together, we can be a big ripple. And it's nothing really works. In one moment, the ripple goes to a talk, and and it hears this weird analogy, and then says, but who are you beyond the body of you as the person, the invisible you? Can you become aware of the invisible you, which is first of all, it's the person that consists of thoughts and emotions, but that's already a little bit beyond the surface of the ocean. You go a little bit into the ocean, and there you exist as a person. And there's all your emotions and your thoughts and your identity as a human. There you are. Already you've become aware of that. And that's still very limited. And that is sustained by the incessant thinking machine. The conditioned mind it sustains the personal selfhood, self-identity. That's amazing. And so the key is to realizing, go deeper and sense your connectedness with the ocean. Ocean in this analogy means consciousness, universal consciousness that pervades the entire universe, the intelligence that underlies all phenomenal existence, the intelligence behind it all, the organizing principle behind the arising of forms, all forms, a vast intelligence that exists, not exist as such, but it gives rise to existence. The vast intelligence is being, it doesn't exist because everything that exists in this dimension.
It's a phenomenon on YouTube whereby people often don't say anything, but they engage in seemingly pointless activities. Modern technology, which in many cases amplifies human unconsciousness, is in itself neutral, so it can also be used to help in the shift to a higher level of consciousness. So if you feel a contribution may be happening through you, you may want to consider using a platform and disseminate in whatever form spiritual teaching or consciousness. infinite possibilities. If you're too afraid to speak, maybe you feel a little inhibited in front of a camera or your phone, you could just do meditations, gazing meditations. Make sure though you're free of thought, otherwise it doesn't work. There's no predicting how many subscribers you will get on YouTube. Or, if that doesn't appeal to you, you could become what is known as an ASMR artist. Some of you may not know what that is. It started a few years ago. I've spoken about it a few times. It's a phenomenon on YouTube whereby people often don't say anything, but they engage in seemingly pointless activities that make certain noises and that require the viewer's presence. It happened spontaneously, it developed. Somebody must have started it 10 years ago or whenever, and then it caught on. Now there are hundreds or thousands of people doing it, some very successfully. That shows that the good ones there's a spiritual dimension to it. And there is a need for it in humans, perhaps don't realize it, that there is a spiritual dimension, and that need is to get out of themselves, to transcend temporarily the person or the personality by the act of giving fullest attention to certain sense perceptions, which in this case is both the visual and the auditory. People are encouraged to put headphones on while they watch these videos, and then you have people, the people who produce them, they may just have something here that they have usually very sensitive microphones, and they may, for example, be shuffling papers for 15 minutes. That make certain noises, or they have a hairbrush, and they go or they make strange sounds with their mouths. It seems very weird. If it's done well, it puts the viewer into the state of presence. Although some are actually designed to put people to sleep, so that would be the opposite. The whole phenomenon is called ASMR. People claim that it produces a certain tingling sensation in their head and back and their back, and that is one phenomenon that happens. But the other that's not usually recognized is that people become still while they listen and watch, and they have a state of attention, and the mind. There's a cessation of thinking while they watch and listen somebody produce these noises. So there was just a suggestion for you. I suggest that you
you bring a certain spiritual practice, if you even want to call it that. It's not really anything separate from normal everyday existence. I suggest you bring that little spiritual practice into your normal life, and that is invite these brief periods of no thought into ordinary human life, into your normal everyday existence. And this could be a simple thing like whenever you look up at the sky is a beautiful thing. I love the sky. I've taken hundreds and hundreds of photos of the sky on my iPhone. Most of the photos I have on my iPhone are of the sky. And whenever you look at the sky, and you don't need to become a sky gazer, no, just a few seconds out of the window or outside, and for that moment, are you able to look without the addition of thought, without adding thought to the sense perception? So all you have, now the sky may be completely clear, it may be completely clouded, or there may be clouds floating around, it doesn't matter. You take it in, whatever it is, and there's a moment of looking, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. In that moment of looking, there's no commentary. It doesn't say, oh, it's going to rain, or not another dreary day, or, oh, I wonder if it's going to stay like that for the rest of the day. None of that, but this can only happen if there's an alertness there. Then there needs to be an alertness that keeps thought at bay. And this is not willpower, it's simply an alert presence that goes, one could say, a raising of your frequency, and it goes, and then you look, and there's the background to the sense perception is no longer you as the person, but you as awareness or consciousness. You are looking as consciousness. You're not looking as a person. The moment you comment on what you're seeing, you interpret what you're seeing, you become the person. So, and I'm only giving one example of, you can make it a habit several times during the day to look at the sky in that way in which you don't add thought. Another practice I suggest, a tree. And even if you live in London, the lovely thing about London is there are lots of trees around, and not only in the parks, but many streets also have trees. And so look at a tree every day, or whenever you see a tree, give it 5 seconds, give it 10 seconds, and see if you can look at that as presence rather than as a person. Just that sense perception and presence. And then you can do it here and now. You can either be aware of something specific and aware of awareness. Those are always the two. You're looking at the sky and you're aware of who is looking or what is looking. The 2 dimensions. As you're sitting here, you're aware of the room, you're aware of the voice, you're aware of the lights. You're not, whatever it is, what in addition can you be aware of in order to be the presence? You're aware of yourself as the awareness. And you don't need thought for that. Thought would interfere with that. So take in this, here's the room, here's the person sitting on a chair, there's a screen there, and take in the totality of this room without adding thought to it. And that's beautiful. You don't need to interpret it, and just, it's still there. You know what it is without calling it anything. And then it deepens. The strange thing is, when you don't add thought when it's not needed, sometimes you need thought. When you don't add thought when it's not needed, there is a depth even to your sense perceptions. So when you look at the sky, it's more than just the sky. When you look at a tree, you don't reduce this mystery that ultimately the tree is, because who knows what the tree is? But by calling it tree, you don't know what it is. You just attach a label to a mystery. That applies to virtually anything, or to anything. When you call it something, you say, oh no, that's what it is. You don't know. It's a convenient label. But it covers up the mystery. It covers up the depth of aliveness that is in everything. As Krishnamurti said once, the moment you teach a child the name of the bird, the child will never see the bird again. No, this does not mean that you should refrain from teaching the child. The child needs the words. It wants to know the words. It says, what's that? Oh, that's a sparrow. Sparrow, okay. What's that? But you see how the moment you give the label, it obscures the depth that's there behind the label. And it's only when you then can relinquish the label, then there is a greater depth to what you see, even to sense perceptions. There is an aliveness in the flower that some people can only get a glimpse of this kind of perception when they take something and they go, wow. Or they look at the sky and say, wow, isn't that amazing? They took the little substance, but what that little substance did, it momentarily made sense perceptions so strong that there was no room for thought anymore. So there was just the experiencing of it, and that can be a liberating thing for certain people who are totally continuously immersed in the voice in the head. But it's not a long-term solution, the little substance. So this is an amazing practice. It is also, if you want to get in touch with the level where intuition arises, where a fresh creative idea arises, where any kind of creativity arises, it may to do with whatever work you do, any creative contribution, if there's something, a problem to be solved and nobody has the answer, if you are able, in all those situations, to step out of thought, instead of thinking, they need to think harder to find the solution, and then you go, and you can't even sleep at night anymore, and you go, what's going on? Many people look at their own lives as one big problem that they can trying to solve somehow. People seek, for many people, their sense of identity is me the problem that's to be solved. And if I could only solve this problem of me, I would be okay. And of course, yes, you can't really solve it, but you can step out of it, and then it solves itself.
We talked about it off the top, right? Are you one of those people who worries about everything, what happened yesterday, what's happening tomorrow, and your mind just keeps going and going and going and going, and there's always somebody in your life that says, you got to live in the moment. You got to live in the moment. If you worry so much about yesterday and today, you're missing the now. Well, chances are your friend who told you that read our next guest book, because he can help teach you live in the moment. Millions of people have read his work. Oprah loves him. Spiritual writer, teacher, Eckhart Tolle will be right here. Here's the bio.
Who you are and stillness are one and the same.
Now, if you're into this guy, you consider Eckhart Tolle one of the world's most influential spiritual leaders. People say he's a master of inner calm and peace. Was he born that way? Is he some kind of a Buddha? Well, no. Here's how it happened. Eckhart was born in Germany, spent his teenage years in Spain, then headed to Britain for university and grad work. Now, up until that time, Eckhart said he was depressed, he was anxious, he was often suicidal. But at the tender age of 29, his life suddenly changed. He says he woke up one day feeling an overwhelming sense of joy and peace, and it took him years to figure out what had happened. It took him even longer to teach others how to get to the same place. So, in a nutshell, here's what Eckhart says. You are not your mind. In fact, he says your mind is your worst enemy, that it overtakes the real you and creates thoughts that make you miserable. So if you want to achieve peace, well, then you've got to disassociate yourself from your mind. Eckhart's key, live in the present. Because according to him, dwelling in the past only leads to guilt and regret. Thinking about the future brings anxiety and worry.
You may have noticed that already.
And it's all summed up in Eckhart's enormously successful book called The Power of Now. He wrote it in Vancouver, where he currently resides. That thing came out over 10 years ago and sold more than 5 million copies. Yeah, you know, thanks in large part to this person. She's also a big fan of Eckhart's follow-up book, A New Earth. It was one of her book club picks.
This is the most exciting thing I've ever done.
And last year, she made it the basis for 10 weeks of seminars with Eckhart on Oprah.com.
Thank you.
Everybody say hello to Eckhart Tolle. Thank you so much. Great to see you, man. How are things? When you first published that book, Power Now, with small independent publisher, 3,000 copies, I can imagine you would have no idea that this was going to happen to you.
No, I thought the book would only appeal to people who are already deeply into spirituality or had been meditating for many years. And after about 3 or 4 months after it got published, I realized that many people were phoning and writing in to tell me they'd bought more than one copy for friends or relatives. Mm-hmm. And then I began to realize that it was a kind of snowball effect and it would be growing and growing. That was a surprise. Another surprise was that for quite a few people, that was the first spiritual book they had ever read. And it made sense to them. And so I hadn't realized the degree of readiness in people for this message. And that was the surprise. And then more surprises came later. The book became what one reviewer called an underground bestseller for a while.
Usually in music, underground means people like it, but no one buys it.
Well, here underground means people buy it, but it's not. There's no publicity, there's no advertising, nothing on television about it, and so word of mouth. Mm-hmm. So it grew for about 1.5 years. It grew through word of mouth. Gradually, it got to some cities. There was a time, at that time, I would take a few copies of the book to little spiritual bookstores in Vancouver every couple of weeks, and then they would phone me again and say, we need another 5 copies. Mm-hmm. I would carry 5 copies.
You did it yourself?
Yes.
That's fantastic.
And, that was enormously satisfying to have this personal contact with the book. And at that time, also, there were not that many readers. People could phone in and say, oh, I'd like to meet you. And said, okay, what time do you want to meet? And then as it grew, after a while, I couldn't do that anymore.
Yeah, rule number 1, man, if someone wants to meet you on Facebook, don't. That's the trick. I bet you, do you have horror stories?
Horror
when you met
stories?
somebody and you went, oh, I got to get out of here.
No, nothing that comes to mind, but the book does seem to, not only The Power of Now, also the later book, A New Earth, for some reason it does seem to upset some people. I remember my office they told me, they don't show it to me, but they told me they opened one package and somebody had shredded the entire New Earth book and sent it in the shredded version back to my office. So something must have triggered something in him.
Well, if you go back a few decades, you're 29 years old, a fateful night, is that what started this whole thing?
Yes, a night when I'd had many unhappy nights, but that night I was just so deeply depressed again, and I'd spent the previous weeks in anxiety, and what happened, a thought came into my head which said, I can't live with myself any longer. And at that moment, a separation happened between myself and that thought, and I looked at the thought and said, I can't live with myself, what does that mean? There must be two of me, there's an I, and there must be some unhappy self that I cannot live with. And through that, although I only understood the full implications years later, a separation happened between the unhappy self, which I later realized is a mental construct consisting of repetitive unhappy thoughts about me and my life, an unhappy story. I was continuously retelling myself the unhappy story of me. And I was so identified with the unhappy story of me that there was no gap between that and me. And that was the self that I couldn't live with. And when I realized that there is a self I can't live with, something separated, and I became the consciousness behind the unhappy self. And I could see that the whole structure of the unhappy self was a kind of fiction, a narrative that I kept repeating in my mind. So the separation happened, and I realized that in essence I am not my story, whether happy or unhappy. I'm the consciousness behind the story. The consciousness or the space, whatever you want to call it, there's not really a name for it. And I suddenly realized myself as that, and with that, I was in a state of peace. From then onwards, I never again identified with this unhappy mental construct, the me with its story. And that's what I call now the shift in consciousness that happened. Or you could also call it an awakening. So, and then later it became the teaching, because I tried to explain, after years, a few years later, people started coming to me, just casually asking questions. And gradually a spiritual teaching developed, but it's all based on that disidentification from this continuous stream of thinking that you take to be yourself, but it's no more than a stream of thinking. It's not who you are in essence.
Well, one thing we know, but however it is we are or we act, ultimately we are all affected by where we come from. That sort of sets the table for who we're going to be in the next phase of our life. And I wondered, for you to get to that point, what were your folks like? I never hear about what your childhood was like that would have set these sort of dominoes up for them to come falling down that one night.
Well, the childhood was already unhappy. There was always almost continuous conflict in my parents' marriage. And I was the only child, which makes it even more difficult, because if you have siblings, then you can kind of relate to them. And so I suffered a lot, I think the beginnings of the deep unhappiness and depression are probably there. But again, I'm glad now that it did happen, because otherwise the shift wouldn't have happened.
You know, the idea of being in the now, it's something that my friends, they've sort of stopped asking me to be in the now because they recognize it's not a reality for me, because so much is like, I'm sort of in the now, but I'm going here and trying this. The one thing we know is that our society is constructed in a way where we have a history and we have things to look forward to. How do you almost approach the unlearning of a people to change the way that this structure, that this society is built? This society is built on, here's my past, learn from my past. If I don't learn from my past, I'm doomed to repeat the mistakes. How do you put all that together, realizing how society is?
Well, this is all true. Of course, it's good to learn from one's past mistakes. On the other hand, if you identify with your past and your memories, and that forms the basis for your sense of self, that becomes a kind of prison. So nothing wrong with learning from the past, but the very essential thing is the realization that your life is always this moment. Your life is never not this moment. And whatever you think or experience has to be in the now. So life and now are actually inseparable.
It's tomorrow never comes, right?
Yes, when it comes, it's today. As they said in the British pub, there was a sign which said, "Free beer tomorrow."
And that is so unfair to drunks. That is so unfair to drunk people. You said Tiger Woods lives in the now, right? That Tiger Woods is a great example of the now?
Yes.
What's the difference between being in the now and just being simply focused? Because when I watch him golf, he golfs like a man who's chasing something. So what's the
Yes.
difference between in the now and being focused?
I don't think he's chasing anything. I think he is present. There's a nice story of a Zen master who was watching a sports person perform, and he was watching very closely, and the person wasn't quite making it, and the Zen master observed him and said, the need to win drains him of power. The need, because if you have the need to win, now the West of course subscribes to that. It says you must want to win. But that's not the Eastern way, and I believe that that's the truer way, because the need to win, you project a goal to some future moment. You cannot fully be present in what you do if you have the need to win. You want to get there.
But if you're a pro athlete, you only have to win, right? That's the challenge.
But the great ones, when they actually perform, when they are, as the expression goes, in the zone, they don't think about winning. They're absolutely and totally present. And so I believe that's where mastery arises, in that state of absolute and complete presence. There's also a nice film, The Legend of Bagger Vance, where it's about a golfer who learns to be present.
You said that there are certain people or things that are better at being in the now than others. You said animals are great at being in the now, but then you also said women are better at being in the now than men. Is that true?
Yes, to some extent. The women are not quite as much in their head as men. Women tend to be, they are in their head too, but not quite as much. They tend to be still a little bit more connected with the body, the energy in the body, with their feelings. So they're not as mind identified, not quite as, there are of course always exceptions, not quite as mind identified as man, and therefore it's a little easier. And so for many talks that I've given, there's always more women than men. This is beginning to change a little bit occasionally now, but still the case.
And the New Earth is just taking the idea of the power of now to a much bigger level, right?
Yes, new perspectives on it, and an elaboration, and a new, also indicating what it is that prevents you from being present. Structures in your mind, the ego, the identification with the voice in the head, to become aware of that. If you're not aware of it, it'll take you over again and again.
I know you've got a lot of traveling to do. When you come back to Canada, please come back on our show.
Thank you.
Lots more to talk about. EckhartTolle.com is his website, and there's a lot more to see with what he's got going on. And of course, he's got them books. Good to see him. Thank you. Eckhart Tolle, everybody. Thank you very much for watching the program tonight. There's an awful lot more to come. Thanks for watching. That's time.
I take care of patients from surgery, chemotherapy, hospice, end of life. And there's that same pressure on all aspects not to spend the time and take care of them maybe the way that we would like to if we could. So I'm doing this to help take care of me, which is great. But my question is related to all the other physicians that I work with who are suffering. And I can see it in them, and it's the more that I learn your teachings, the more I see the suffering in them, and I don't know what to do to help them.
Right. I think I saw your question. I had selected it to answer it if it was a written question. That might have been yours. That was good, so I'm glad you were chosen.
Thank you.
have you made any attempt to somehow convey this to your colleagues, maybe unsuccessful attempts so far?
To some degree. Just over the last couple of years, there's been real research showing, burnout, and that's a definable thing. And so we can use the term burnout, which doesn't seem to offend people, to talk about it.
Yeah.
And then I've introduced some mindfulness strategies because that's another term that doesn't seem to offend people.
I was just going to say that mindfulness has become almost acceptable. So you can, if you use that word, that might be more acceptable than presence. It's the same thing, of course, but I don't use mindfulness because it implies that your mind is full, but that's okay. So what about creating a support group for people who work in similar capacities, both people that you know personally and perhaps other people? Because nowadays, the strange thing is, the wonderful thing about the technology that we have nowadays, not only it amplifies human madness, because any person can put out any thought and immediately, no matter how crazy it is, there will be a few thousand people in the world who will respond to it and agree with you and participate in the craziness. But on the other hand, there's also, you can reach so many people through the media, those things, internet and so on. But you would start on a small scale. What about a mindfulness group for physicians? You could call it that. You could become the leader of that. Because
Okay. Okay.
sometimes life asks you to do something. It may ask you to do something before you may think you're ready for it, but life knows better. And the strange thing is, you as a person would never really feel ready for this, because it's hard to do. But if you can become still and get out of the way, because becoming still means getting out of the way, if you can become still, you'll be amazed, and I'm not only talking to you, but many others, you'll be amazed how empowered suddenly the words that you speak become, or the energy that flows through you, and how inspired you become, and what it might lead to. Because things need to change if the system, not only in medicine but in many other areas, is ripe for either collapse or complete change. It cannot go on the way it's going, because it can only become more disintegrating, and no matter where you look, it's a question of, it'll either collapse or change. And if it collapses, that's fine too. Now I'm talking about social systems and so on in general. Eventually something more conscious will arise, or something more conscious may arise and transform the old before it collapses completely. So what is it that you could, the ideas will come to you, you can just offer to them, for example, have a meditation, show them what mindfulness is, see if they like it, and then go on from there, and then transmit it, go on the internet, contact others. It may suddenly spread. There are people in mainstream who are doing this. I got invited by a scientist to Stanford University a couple of years ago. I gave a talk there, and you would have thought they would not be interested in what I have to say, but that I was wrong. They were very interested. No, not everybody came, but many people did come. And this is a scientist who, actually I believe he's a neurosurgeon, and he teaches at Stanford. He is extremely interested in mindfulness and spreading the message. He's connected also to Buddhism and Buddhist teachings. So maybe you can talk to him and see what feedback you get from him. It's good if you can, I don't know if you've met other physicians here, if you can build up a support network of people who can then support others. There are infinite possibilities, but anybody who is here would have to consider themselves as a leader in this, because you may not yet be fully present all the time and fully enlightened on a daily basis, but you know much more than most. I mean, and I don't mean conceptual knowledge. There's a knowing in you of that dimension of consciousness that is still news to many. And I believe that the world desperately needs you. And you start in your world. You can reach the most appropriate place for you to reach others is within your sphere of influence, and that is your work. So what form that will take, only you can know. It will be helpful to connect with others, get feedback, talk about it, what can we do? And then the person at Stanford, I believe, is Professor James Doty. Unfortunately, I don't know how to spell it. Doty, something like that. I can let you know. So see yourself as spearheading this movement of awakening, because they need you. So not only your patients need you, your colleagues need you, and then the work that you do, which is wonderful, will be enhanced immeasurably by bringing a different state of consciousness to it. And once that happens, then the entire system may begin to undergo a change. Change always begins within. How do you feel about this?
I'm a little speechless. But it's a crisis, and I think that it really is a crisis. And so, if I know you're speaking not just to me but to others that are here, and I think that we need to do this in all aspects of medicine. So, if I can help.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you for giving me the push.
Thank you. I know that Dr. Patel and his wife is here. He's been coming for many years. And have you met him? No. I believe he has in his cancer clinic in Bakersfield, he introduces also counseling and mindfulness. Maybe you can connect with him.
Great.
Good. Thank you. This mind-made sense of self is also much more focused on the negative than the positive. To be free, you awaken to who you are beyond your history and your life situation. Now, as you probably know, one of the most challenging things in your life is other people, because they're so difficult. People are so challenging. And for many people, one of their greatest sources of suffering or unhappiness, strangely enough, is other people. Sometimes, of course, it might be a situation, but it's usually every situation is associated with certain people. But of course, another source of unhappiness, of course, could be your physical body, which might become ill. That's a different matter. But yes, people are difficult. It's not surprising that Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, said, hell is other people. That's the ego talking, of course. Life could be so much nicer with all these dreadful people around. And of course, these are judgments. These are judgments of the mind. And the moment you encounter another human being, the moment you meet another human being, if you are trapped in the conditioned mind, you will very quickly have things to say about him or her. And the moment you have thought arising, you're imposing judgment, you can't really experience that human being anymore. And so that happens all the time when people meet others. But what would it be if I could meet another human being and just look into his or her eyes without making it too obvious? Even in ordinary situations, you go to a restaurant, you go to a shop, you buy something, you pay for it. There's a brief interaction with the person you give the money to. And in that, are you able to just look at this person for a few seconds while the transaction happens and be free of thinking? And there's suddenly a connection. There's no need to make it obvious. You don't go like, and you don't have to tell them, I'm connecting with you on a spiritual level, because they'll go, what? You don't, but it's a beautiful thing to be able to just be spacious with another human being. It's easier with a dog, obviously, because the dog does not have the screen of mind that obscures that sense of presence or beingness in the dog, the consciousness of the dog. Humans usually have this screen of mental stuff, so it's not as easy to relate deeply. You have to penetrate the level of mind, which sometimes is not all that pleasant either. It's like can be very difficult conditioning of this personality. Some personalities are very difficult or might be aggressive or whatever. But it's looking at another human being and just like this, no thought. And it's always pleasant. It's a pleasant, suddenly you sense a connection and it's pleasant. But don't try that too soon. Start with a tree. Because there's nothing in the way with a tree, there's no mind. The tree is an expression of consciousness, but the tree is very still. It's even stiller than the dog. The tree is just, it might have been there for 100 years, 200 years, 300 years. Some trees have been there for 1,000 years. And so you can look at a tree, and by looking means, we'll do more of that after the break, but just when you look at something, you give it your attention, and there's a tree. And you give it your complete attention. Just look at the totality of it, and then occasionally you look at little details. Just be with it and the totality of the tree without needing to impose any thought on it. You don't need to call it anything. You don't need to know the name in order to experience the tree. You don't need to know the name of the tree. Fine, there's nothing wrong with knowing the name of the tree. But the name of the tree can, if you're too attached to the name of the tree, can prevent you from experiencing the tree. And that is a very common thing, how the moment you name something, you think that's it. And then you don't realize there is a depth to that which the name obscures. The spiritual teacher Krishnamurti said to somebody, the moment you teach a child the name of the bird, he or she will never see that bird again. Slight exaggeration, of course he'll see that bird again, but what he means is the child will lose the deeper connectedness with the bird because the label, the mental label, will be in the way, and the child will mistake the mental label for it. And so the mental label keeps you trapped on the surface of reality. And so very knowledgeable people, and there's nothing wrong with knowledge, but let's say people are very knowledgeable about nature, sometimes are so trapped in their knowledge, all they know is mental stuff about things. So they know a lot about the tree, but they never know the tree. You have two kinds of knowing. One is conceptual knowing through labels, and one is a deeper knowing through immediate perception, through awareness. And then you sense something deeper in the tree that can never be known through conceptual knowledge. You connect with the tree on a deeper level, it becomes almost what I'm saying now. Conventionally, one would say this is a mystical thing to say, or it's a poetic thing to say, but there's a reality behind this. And if that dimension is missing from your life, you run around the surface of reality, never connecting with anything or anybody really deeply, never sensing your connectedness with other life forms, nature, animals, humans. So it's important to develop this ability to experience without imposing labels. So you can just be with the tree and look at it. You don't have to hug it, you can, but it's not necessary. If you want to hug it, it's fine. Because the touch can free you also from thinking, to take your attention into the sense of touch, yes. But all the senses are involved in that experience. And then the trees can then teach you stillness, because the tree is so still. But you have to tune in. You can't tune in with mental labels. You have to be there. And then there's an alertness there. And with that alertness, you not only perceive the tree, you sense the underlying consciousness of the tree, because ultimately it's the same consciousness that is the essence of who you are, but in a different manifestation, a different frequency level, so to speak. And then the tree can teach you to be still, and you become. But it's not the same stillness in you as the stillness of the tree, because the tree is a long way below thought. The stillness in you is above thought, but in there you meet the tree. You are above thought in presence, and the tree is long below thought in beingness. And you meet the tree, and then the tree can teach you to be still, and you can actually sense that the tree is just. Oh, that's the tree. The tree would be saying Om if it could speak, or continuously, because that's the rootedness of the tree is not only rooted in the soil, The tree is rooted in being, and beingness, the source of life. It hasn't come out that far yet. So it just is. Ah. We are here to deepen our sense of I. This is the most important thing, really, that you can do in this lifetime. Most humans, that's a sad fact, are not very deep at all. Most humans are superficial. Their sense of I is derived from external things and is derived from certain ideas in their head about who they are. Those ideas, of course, are connected to external things, what other people think of me, what I own, what I possess, my history, all things, ideas in your head. So when the average person says I, he or she refers to that superficial sense of self that really is derived from the movement of thought and the emotions that go with it. But the wonderful thing is that there is the possibility in every human of deepening their sense of I, so that when they say I, they no longer refer to the mind-made, idea-based sense of self, but a much deeper sense of self or being that has nothing to do with thinking and has nothing to do with external things. And you arrive there, you get there by dropping down, taking your sense of your attention behind thinking, let's call it that. And that's what meditation is about. And that's why we're here. And that's what's happening while you listen to these words. Already there is a deepening in you, which is part of the transmission, which miraculously works even through electronics and the camera. And you notice that there is a sense of presence or beingness behind your thinking. And that realization is already the deepening. And of course, I'm inviting you to enter that state of realizing that there is a presence there in you, a presence that is more essentially you, or that's I really, that is more essentially who you are than anything in the realm of external things, physical body, or ideas in your head. So there is a dimension in you that's much more real, deeper, than anything in the world of form, because that's really what the superficial sense of self comes down to. It's identification with some form, external form, thought form, emotional form. And identification with form means, what does that mean, identification? It means you derive your sense of self, of I, of who you are, from some accumulation of forms, ultimately thought forms, emotional forms, thought forms. External forms are really also ultimately experienced as thought forms. You cannot experience anything out there as it is. It has to become through sensory perception, and as your mind is transformed into a mental image, and that's the thought form. So identification with form is, if there's nothing else, of course the form dimension is there, you cannot deny it. But if that's all there is in your life, then you are a superficial human being, and a superficial human being is anxious, fearful, easily upset, worries a lot, gets depressed when things don't go as they should, gets temporarily elated when something so-called good happens, but it never lasts very long, and often even the elation turns out to be a delusion. So a superficial human being is continuously frustrated in their search for something more real, more lasting. But because they are looking for that which is more real, more lasting, and more fulfilling in the realm of forms, they never find it. And they remain superficial. But that which is more deeply fulfilling than anything in the realm of form is very close to you. You don't need time to arrive at it. You don't need to acquire it. It is very close. That space where you are essentially formless but intensely alive, intensely intelligent but formless. That formless inner space is very close. There was an astronomer once said that outer space, we don't realize how close outer space is. He said, you can get in your car, and if your car could drive vertically upward, within an hour's drive from where you are, you would be in outer space. An hour's drive is not that far, so if you go upward, you drive for an hour and you're in outer space, a totally different dimension. Now, inner space is even closer than that. And when we call it space, it's another word for formless. Undifferentiated. So on the one hand, your I is the surface I of the physical body, of all the sense perceptions, of thoughts and emotions. That's the surface I, with its name and its history, its temporary form. And then there is the deeper I. As far as the surface I is concerned, you and I are different. Physical appearance, different kinds of thoughts, different history, different name. But as you go deeper within, behind thought, where all there is a sense of presence, beingness or aliveness. That's exactly the same presence, beingness or aliveness that is in me. And if we both go to that dimension of depth within ourselves, we can meet there in a sense of oneness. The surface self, there is no oneness there, because it's all differentiated. So if I'm stuck only on the surface dimension, every other human being is totally other. That's the egoic dilemma. The ego actually wants it because it defines its identity through the otherness of others. So it loves to criticize and judge and dismiss and gossip about the faults of others, and so it makes the others more other than it feels more itself. That's the love is totally impossible in that state. And what the ego calls love, of course, is not love at all. It's a clinging and a wanting. It's only when I realize that apart from my surface self, there is a deeper I that has nothing to do with thinking or any form. And if I can sense that deeper I as a silent presence within, not just when I go and sit on the floor and meditate, it's fine there as an introduction to it, but in everyday life, so that you can simultaneously be the form I, the form identity, and the deeper sense of self. You can function in this world on the two levels. I had an encounter not long after I experienced the awakening. I was in a waiting room somewhere, and this huge guy came in. Compared to him, I'm just this puny little guy sitting there, and he planted himself in front of me, and obviously enjoying his power. I can't remember what he wanted. He wanted something, and I could sense that sense of presence intensifying. And I just looked, and he said a few things, and suddenly he became extremely disconcerted, because there was no attempt on my part to put up any kind of defense or compete in any way. And he got deflated like a balloon and didn't know what to say or do anymore. That's an interesting phenomenon. So the important thing for you is, in any situation, be in touch with that inherent power of presence, because ultimately that is the power of now. Ultimately, the now is the presence, and the presence is you. So, and ultimately, you are, in its deepest sense, you are the now, because the now is the presence, and this is why I speak of the power of now. The power of now is also the power of you, and not the personal you, but the you that remains and never was not connected, and always is connected, and always is an intrinsic part of universal power itself, universal consciousness itself, the one consciousness that underlies all phenomena, the one consciousness of which all phenomena are only a temporary expression. So there's enormous power there. How that manifests in this world is a secondary thing. Perhaps it only manifests as an emanation that comes through you, or it flows into something that you do or create. And it's a great thing to feel that power, which is not comparative, because you know that everybody else is also a temporary expression of that inherent power, although most people don't know it. It's the famous guy that I spoke of in perhaps the Power of Now. The beggar is sitting on his old box for his many years, asking for little coins, and then somebody says, "What's inside that box? I've never looked." And it's filled with gold. And I gave that analogy or parable at the beginning of the Power of Now. So that is discovering that power in you, and for most people, they're looking for little substitutes to give them a sense of who they are. And of course, this is the reason why it is not unusual for humans to awaken spiritually, to awaken to who they are in their essence, when either one big thing or many things that they had derived their identity from, good looks, physical strength, possessions, abilities to do this or that, recognition, social status in society, those things, and suddenly they lose these things, or they lose one big thing that was the main, that gave them their sense of identity, the one main thing that gave them their sense of identity, and that's gone. And that's, of course, would be, at first, is terrible suffering, and then it can force a human to that deeper place, because out here, unless you quickly, the ego might make an attempt to quickly rebuild some mind-made identity by creating another narrative. That's possible too. Not every human who experiences great loss necessarily goes to that deeper place, but the potential is there. So it could be a sports person who is great master of some sports, and then he or she has an accident, can never participate in that activity again, and that gave him or her the sense of identity. It at first leads to terrible suffering. And then potentially there is a deepening there. And the essence, then you are forced into your essence. There's a medieval image of Fortuna. Fortuna is a goddess of good luck or fortune. It goes back to Roman times. That shows the fickleness of things, the transient nature of all the things of this world, which are the things that people identify with. It gives them their sense of identity, their self-esteem. And it has a Latin inscription on it. It's an image of the goddess. And translated from Latin, it says, this is supposed to be a king speaking, or former king, which king stands for any ego. And it says, it has these words in Latin. The first word is, I shall reign. The next word says, I reign. To reign, to reign a kingdom. I shall reign. I reign. I have reigned. I have lost the kingdom. The normal sequence of events. Old age is a great opportunity for that, unfortunately missed in many, many cases, tragically missed the opportunity as old age approaches, and then you enter old age, proximity of death, loss of physical abilities, of social status, retired, who am I when I no longer have that title, my work. All these things are great opportunities for going deeper. And what we are attempting to do now is getting as many books and other material out to old people's homes everywhere, and also hospices and hospitals and so on, because those are great places where spiritual transformation could happen. So the important thing then is sense your presence, the presence of you, which is not the person, something deeper. That is consciousness, being aware of itself. And then you no longer need a narrative to tell you who you are. Free of that conceptual sense of self. And this telling yourself a story in your mind about your life, that also goes out of the window. My life. This is what it has come to. All those illusions that I had, all those wonderful ideas I had when I was 20. Oh. Now you may well still be at the peak of your success, worldly success, and that's fine. Why not enjoy it? It's not who you are, so you better go into the presence, because it doesn't last. With it also comes the wonderful ability to appreciate other human beings, what they can do, what they know, how they look, without feeling diminished by appreciating the external things connected to another human being. The ego can't do that, because if the ego appreciates something, it might pretend because it wants something from you, but if the ego appreciates something, it feels diminished. You meet somebody who obviously looks so much better than you, and the ego feels diminished by that. So sometimes it tries to say something critical about that person in order to restore the injured sense of self. It's absurd, but that's how it works. But when you come from presence, you can look at a beautiful form of a human being and appreciate that and feel this is so beautiful. Or the achievements of another human being, to appreciate their achievements. Great, what wonderful things that this person can do, it's so wonderful. I would never be able to do that. And yet, the fact that you would never be able to do that, because perhaps you're not strong enough, or you're not inclined in that particular direction, does not diminish anything of you. So the appreciation of others then comes in, and it's a lovely thing. I even appreciate when I occasionally see people getting into their Ferrari, and of course usually their ego is walking with them, and so the car, and usually it's red color just to make sure that everybody notices. And I love that thing too. It's a beautiful thing that somebody built, and okay, and this ego is enjoying himself. That's okay. And you may find that sometimes very creative people, there are some who have no ego about their creations. They do not derive their identity from what they create. Others have fairly big egos. That happens too. I believe the greatest creators in this world don't have an ego about that. Maybe they have it somewhere else, but not around that. And that sometimes means that they continue to be creative. So sometimes you see this modesty, which is lack of ego in people who have created something really great. Composers, poets, even some scientists like Einstein never developed an ego around what he came up with, the incredible realization about space and time. But he never developed this ego as I created that. There was relatively little conceptual self. And he found it absurd that he had become one of the most famous people on the planet, even in his lifetime. He just couldn't, it's so weird. And he talked about the gap between what people think of me and who I am is just incredible. And by the way, that's the last thing, that's also the place where you can manifest out of the power of presence. If that presence, if you're linked into that presence, see what the universe wants to, because that presence is the presence of consciousness. Does it want to create something through you? Perhaps it does. But in that presence, everything is already present in an undifferentiated state. So whatever it is that you create externally is like the diluted form of something that in its essence, its concentrated non-form is already there in you. So whatever you can possibly create is already present on some level, on a deeper level. There have been composers who created the most incredible pieces of music, and many of them said that they listened as if it came out of that place of depths already fully created, and they just wrote it down.